Welcome friends, Goat Toaster 9, JJ Shankles here, back with an old-timey retro review. Today we've got the old Nikon D1X. This is an older pro model from Nikon. I've done a review on the D1, but that model I bought online, not sure if I could get it working, and it couldn't get it working, so I bought a D1X. This one was slightly more expensive because it's a slightly higher resolution sensor, and I thought it'd be fun to go through today and do a little review comparing it to the Z6 that I'm currently filming it on, to show a little bit of how Nikon has expanded and grown over the years from this camera released in 2001 all the way up to the modern Z6, which is its first mirrorless camera out. Great for video, great for photography. The Z6 I think is an amazing camera, but I wanted to compare it against something that's so much older. 17 years is quite a ways in technology. We've seen so much growth in the digital photography and videography realm, so I wanted to show a little bit of the comparisons. It is amazing to see how similar these cameras are. A lot of the dials are the same. The button placement is similar. There's been evolutions across the years, making the D line a lot better, and then now the Z line adopts a lot of the same features, and button placement I think is just beautiful. Nikon has done such a good job. And if you are waiting around to see if the D1X is an actually better camera than the Z6, you're probably going to be disappointed. I think the Z6 is a better camera. But I did want to go through and set that comparison up, sort of to just compare how much Nikon has grown across the years, and if the D1 is actually still a good camera to use. I picked it up for around $100 on eBay, and this is a very good model. If you get a little bit more scuffed up or higher shutter count, you can get them for fairly cheap on eBay. The most difficult part of it is the battery, but I'll get into that in the review. I just wanted to clear that up initially before we get into it, just so no one's waiting around and then putting some comments down below saying, why are you comparing such different cameras? I know they're different cameras, I just wanted to make an interesting comparison. First thing I want to go into is just body in general. It's amazing how similar this one is. All their D single digit line cameras, their pro cameras, have a lot of similarities across the years, and there's a slight evolution. Each one gets slightly better and improves upon the previous one, which is an amazing thing that Nikon's done to really listen to users and make it better. This is the original. The D1X does improve over the D1. It adds things like a monitor button, which on modern cameras that's a standard, but on the D1 you had to change the mode from, instead of single continuous, there was a play setting. You change it to that, and in that setting the monitor on the back would turn on and show you the pictures. The on-off switch is very similar. The dials are also very similar. The placement of switches hasn't really changed across the years. From, you still got your manual, single, continuous focus on the front. A few of the flaws of the D1X that did get improved later on is that they didn't put any I/O ports on the left side. They instead put them on the front. There's a DC input port right on the front of the camera, and that's the best way to charge this, because a big downside to this old camera that was improved in the D2 is these old batteries. These are old nickel batteries, and they still don't hold much of a charge, and buying new ones is fairly expensive because they're kind of dangerous, bad for the environment. You really have to make sure you recycle them, not just toss them in the trash, because that will release a lot of bad chemicals into the environment. And they're also fairly expensive. The charger might be as expensive as the camera is on eBay, unless you get a good deal. This one I got bundled with it, so it was not as big of a deal, but that's most of the cost. You can buy a DC input, which plugs right into the front, allows you to power it on, and that's kind of the best way to charge it. You won't be able to do it remote or carrying this outside. My battery lasts not very long. I have to go out, turn it on, take a picture, turn it off, because I know it won't last. Or it will last sometimes. It's very finicky. Sometimes it'll say it's dead, then I shake the camera a little bit and it'll start working again. It's just not a great battery in there. That's just the downside to it. Continuing on the tour of this, around to the back, you've got this tiny little screen here. You can put it onto monitor. It's interesting how much cameras have changed over the years. The Z6, most of the back is the screen. It takes up most of the camera. This one, it's a small feature of it because camera screens were a lot harder to make good back then and more expensive, so they just put a small one on here. It's really hard to check focus on here. It's more you can check your composition on here. Focus you really have to nail through the optical viewfinder. This, you can do that, or changing menu settings. Which menu settings, another interesting thing, it's saved down here. There's a little metal flap that uses a little magnet to keep it up. So metal flap comes down. On there you've got your menu, white balance, function, lock. But if you open up your menu, it pops up here. It's a very old-fashioned menu settings, which you can scroll through. The D-pad isn't very good. There is a lock, a physical lock here, and allows the buttons to not move. In later models, the lock will still allow you to move the physical buttons, it just won't register as a click. This one locks it down. Interesting things to note is the ISO. You have to go into the menu, over to ISO to change. ISO goes from 125 all the way up to 800, and that's your limited range of ISO settings. So that's another downside to this. It's not going to be as good at high ISOs. High ISO being 800. 800 is just not going to be great. I'm going to show some comparison pictures in a little bit to show you a little bit of what that looks like. Other than that, the menu system is fairly basic, fairly simple. There's not that much this camera does beyond taking pictures. Continuing on the back, next to the D-pad, you do have this. You pull the first flap up, press the button, then this opens up. Then you can get down into your card, press that in, pulls out an old compact flash card. The downside to compact flash is inside there's a bunch of different pins that this slots into. So it is one thing that can get damaged on these old-timey cards and the old cameras if you're not careful putting them in and out. If you're just sliding them in and out, that's something that can break fairly easily on these older cameras. On eBay, you'll find ones with broken card readers and shutters that are broken. Those are about the only two things that happen to this because it's such a tank of a body. It's a solid magnesium construction. If I had to pick this or the Z6 to use as a weapon, this is what I would use. If a bear was coming at me, I would take this, use it as a weapon, and I might win. Z6, I would just start running. That's not a weapon. It's a great feel in your hand, and it's also great to have this vertical grip. The vertical grip isn't as good as the D2X, which is in the background here. I'm going to do a review on that one later, but currently we're on the D1X. Portrait handle isn't as good as the landscape picture, and that's about it for the physical tour of it. Other than that, it's fairly basic, has a lot of the same buttons and switches as modern cameras do. You can check out my review of the regular D1. I'll put it up in the corners here. That shows more of a physical review of this. You're getting a 5.3 megapixel sensor, which really doesn't stack up very well today's standards, where you're getting 12, 24, 48. Huge sensors on there. It's also a cropped sensor, which even in a pro body like this, it's kind of interesting that they used to make them in cropped sensors. It's the D3, which is where they step up to the full frame sensor. The D2 steps up the megapixels, but stays at the cropped sensor APS-C. And with that 5.3 megapixels, since this is the D1X, it has a higher megapixel count. The D1H, on the other hand, has lower megapixels, but with higher burst. This one you're only gonna get about 3 shots per second, but this big shutter in here does sound amazing in this large body. And it filled up the buffer right there. You do get only a few shots before the buffer runs out, so it's really not a high-speed camera. It's really more of a, you want that higher megapixels shooting that 5.3 megapixels. Comparing this to the Z6, that's another point to the Z6 with a 24 megapixel sensor in there and being full frame at the same time, while giving you 12 frames per second out if you don't use the mechanical shutter. Another lacking spec here is there's no video capabilities of the D1X. It wasn't until the D3S was the first pro line of Nikon cameras that had video, and that was only 720p. The Nikon Z6, on the other hand, comes with 4K up to 30 frames a second, or 180p up to 120 frames per second. This wasn't a CMOS sensor. This is a CCD sensor, which is just a different technology. It wasn't until the D2X, that camera back there, that Nikon put a CMOS into their pro line of cameras, which now with the Z6 that I'm filming on right now, that's a backside illuminated CMOS sensor. But I did want to show a couple comparison shots. I tried to take a variety of pictures, from some bright colorful shots to some high detail shots outside of grass or trees. But what do you think about those pictures? Let me know in the comments down below what you think, how you think they stand up over 17 years of advancing from this one to the Z6. This was $6,000 when it was released, and it was a technical marvel. It was well worth $6,000. The big downside is the batteries. That's why I wouldn't recommend it if you want to take it outside. The batteries are kind of expensive to buy a newer one, and they're still not great. For the price of the camera being under $100, buying an entire battery for 30 or 40 bucks. It works great with the DC input though, so if you don't mind being plugged into the wall outlet, then it works pretty well. It sounds amazing. I do really like that shutter sound. 3 frames a second and runs out of buffer in about 10 shots. Overall, an amazing piece of tech that you can buy for $100 or less nowadays on eBay. Really impressed with it, how it still holds up today, even though the technology is moving on so quickly. I love the feel of it in the hand. There's nothing that beats this pro grip, where holding this in your hand, I don't even feel like I need the strap to it. I hold the strap so I can loop it around my neck whenever I'm not actively holding it in my hand. But if I'm holding it in my hand, there's just no risk of dropping it because it's so big and so good feeling. If you have big hands like me, you'll probably enjoy such a large grip here, and in good conditions can still take some great pictures. But let me know in the comments down below what you think about the comparison pictures. How do you think it stacks up against the modern camera? Does it hold up? 17 years is a lot of time. And while you're down there commenting, make sure you like and subscribe over there. Make sure you don't miss any more videos, tips, tricks, tutorials. That's what this channel is all about. Later I'm going to be doing a full review of this D2X, which is a huge advance over the D1X. Technology advanced in the 4 years between these two cameras being released, and it's impressive to see how much closer that one is to the Z6 as Nikon keeps improving their cameras and moving forward. Thank you guys, and I hope you have an amazing day. Go take some pictures. Go Toaster out.